This episode features content from a call that Bryan had with several church leaders. And from time to time, we offer these Church Advance live virtual events. And if you want to learn more about these and sign up for one, they're completely free for you to join. Simply head over to bryansams.com to learn more and sign up for the next one. Bryan would love to have you join him for these free opportunities to connect with other church leaders and ask questions and have discussion. It really is a wonderful time of virtual fellowship. Well, we are so glad that you've joined us for this episode where we're continuing to advance a reformation, a fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Bryan Sams.
You know, I don't remember really doing a dive in like with great consciousness as far as, you know, Spurgeon's life. And so I wrote down 10 things that I thought were valuable, just things that you may or may not know about Spurgeon that would be, again, worth you reading the book, but also there's a couple ministry lessons there. So I wrote down 10. One, he obviously faithfully preached the word. I think that you know, that is most people know that about Spurgeon, but he was a committed Bible student. He was a committed theologian. Some of you may be familiar with his controversies surrounding the Baptist Union and their, you know, them starting to accept false doctrine and so on and so forth. Spurgeon was committed to the word, and you know, it was refreshing to see that in his life. Number two, he had a very special and genuine relationship with his wife. And you just keep reading it over and over again. And I know there's been books written about it, and there's even been a book written specifically about his wife. But as you read their correspondence, as you read them talking to one another, about one another, there was something special there, you know, and it just, I always, you know, want to try to maintain the fact that my relationship with my wife is solid, because that's more important than anything that we're going to do related to church or anything like that. And it's been often said, you can have a family without a ministry, but you can't have a ministry without a family. And I just admire, as busy as the guy was and all the things that he had going, his wife was really just the love of his life. And they were not, because both of them had illness, you know, they weren't like together a lot as far as like serving and traveling and all that sort of thing. I mean, it was just a unique situation. Number three, and I love this, he had a committed interest in training preachers, which is something that I am passionate about. The college, as you no doubt heard, lectures to my students. I mean, there was a full-blown pastor's college there where I mean, he trained hundreds of pastors, and they were well trained. Many of them went on and pastored great churches. You know, so Spurgeon's disciples, so to speak, were scattered all throughout England and Europe. And these guys were known for their, you know, passionate preaching, et cetera. Number four, and this is good for all of us, but he had enormous ministry critics, and it was on all kinds of fronts, man. It was like, you know, his orphanage would get criticized. You know, the college would get criticized. He was criticized for purchasing his final home, which actually, you know, if you read the story, he had a pretty modest home throughout most of his life. But then when his physical condition declined, he bought kind of like an estate, had some acreage, and he actually did most of his work from home in the last years of his life. And people were criticizing him for being, you know, elaborate or exuberant or whatever, and which nothing could be further from the truth if you know the whole story. Mm-hmm. You know what's amazing about that, though? Here's what I learned. Every ministry and every pastor has critics incessantly, and you just got to live. I had a long conversation with a pastor friend just the other day, and he was asking me about that. He's like, how do you stay focused, when you have ministry critics? But in my case, it was more recently was outside of our church, but then before that, it was really inside our church. And there's really two rules of thumb here. Number one, I do not quickly take criticism from somebody I would not take advice from.
Yeah.
So look, if you're a critic and I, frankly, I don't really care what you think.
Yeah.
That's something that I think all of us could do with, and I don't have to get into it. I don't have to respond to it. That's the second thing. I am not responsible to respond to every criticism that comes my way. And Spurgeon, man, I mean, he got hammered often. And I love how he just stayed course, and any great leader, any great ministry person, that's what they're going to do. They're going to stay course, in spite of criticism that they face. Number 5, this is, I thought this, well, what was I going to say? Yeah. In fact, and I'm going to go a little further on this. I thought this was another interesting point along this criticism line. He ignored counsel from one of his closest mentors and associates about writing. A guy told him, often a good speaker is not a good writer, and you would do well to stay focused on what God's called you to do. And he ignored that counsel and began to work on the writing, for which we're all thankful, now. And a lot of it at the beginning, and really probably what he's most prominently known for is the printed sermon, which of course he would preach it on Monday. His secretaries would come and they would work back through the sermon and reproduce it in print form. But then of course he wrote a number of books also. And so I think we're all thankful that he ignored that criticism or that challenge, and just said, this is what I feel like God wants me to do. And I think that's an important point too, man. Like, I remember when I came here to River City, which was Harvest then, I had some of my closest friends encourage me not to come here. And, they would say things like, Bryan, we just think your giftedness may be limited there, and maybe you should be thinking about a bigger platform. I mean, I heard that, like, these are like direct quotes, which, I mean, I understand that some people may, you may think something like that, and maybe you feel compelled to share it. But to me, at the end of the day, man, you got to do what God has called you to do. And not everybody's always going to understand that. Not everybody's always going to be supportive of that. So I really appreciate about him. Okay. So here's number 5. All right. Now this is just for fun here. Don't y'all get nervous about it. This is just for fun. Okay. He drank alcohol and smoked cigars. Okay. I mean, he did. And I've heard everybody try to talk about, I've heard all kinds of stories about Spurgeon. You need to read it from the horse's mouth. Okay. Every conservative person wants to try to say that there was some spiritual reason why he stopped or whatever. I am not reading that. Okay. In fact, he gives an account in the book where some guy gets up at the pastor's college and roasts people for smoking cigars. And Spurgeon basically got up afterwards and basically told him, hey, you guys have often heard me say that, it's one of the greatest joys and pleasures of life is smoking a good cigar after a day's work or something like that. So again, I'm not justifying any of it. It's just interesting. And I wanted to say something about that. I'm not defending one or the other. Okay. And Brandon and I we were just talking about this even more recently. Look, I'm not defending one way or the other. I'm not trying to say yes or no about one thing or the other. I'm just saying that cultural fundamentalism, okay, created taboos that are very recent in culture at large, and in some places would just be completely unheard of, like Europe, for example, where the vast majority of believers would drink alcohol, especially at the Lord's Supper. Many of them would outside of that. And then historically, I mean, there's just a whole ton of people that would smoke cigars and, these kinds of things. Again, I'm not justifying, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'll get criticized if I post this little discussion on the air, which is fine too. I'm just saying historically, it's interesting that, and here's the thing, if you would have probably told them, if you would talk to one of those people and say, you shouldn't do that. I mean, like for conviction reason, they would probably be like, what, what are you talking about? It's like going to I don't know if you guys have ever experienced like being around somebody. Most of us, our background, our whole context of like growing up and stuff was fundamental Baptist. Okay. But then you start realizing there's a whole lot of other churches out there. There's a whole lot of other Christians out there. And sometimes you get to interface with them, one reason, and you'll maybe somehow, maybe something like translations will come up or contemporary Christian music will come up. And they're just like they don't even have a context because none of those things have ever been an issue to any of them. Like they lived in the contemporary Christian music world and their churches always use the NIV or something like that. And so it's funny, when you meet somebody that wasn't in that culture, right or wrong, you find that it wasn't an issue. And I think the same thing's true with social drinking or private drinking and certain use of tobacco. Again, I'm not defending it. I think it's interesting and you should read about it. Next, he had significant physical challenges. Spurgeon toward the end of his life spent 4 months, sometimes a year in France, away from England in warmer climates. I think, I can't remember the name of the place, but, and would have spent seasons of time away from preaching, like months. And I mean, obviously it may not be a direct thing. Like we have to take a lot of time off, or we may not have the same physical challenges, but I do think the importance of our physical health comes into play. And some of Spurgeon's, I mean, obviously was out of his control. He had certain things that couldn't have been remedied, but I think it wasn't like his life was without, difficulty or flaw, which leads me to number 7. And that's, he took lengthy times off for rest. And again, I think he did that more so at the end of his life. And I think if you read the book or read anything about him, he was under enormous pressure, mentally, physically, stress, and probably induced some of that. And he kept an incredible pace of ministry for most of his life. And I think, I don't know, maybe he would do that differently today. Maybe he would adjust pace a little bit earlier so that he didn't have to be so, so sickly kind of at the end. But regardless, I think we could all make a case for our physical health being important to us. Somebody told me one time, if you don't care for your physical health now, you will be forced to care for it later. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. Number 8, he was incredibly generous with his resources. Spurgeon was no doubt wealthy. A lot of his wealth would have come from his books and the selling of books and sermons that were circulated and stuff. But as you read the account, Spurgeon invested large portions of that right back into the work. Most of his wealth was invested right back in the church, which is super interesting to read. Again, that doesn't mean a person can't be wealthy. That's not the point. You guys know that. I don't believe that. I think I still think that financial health is a great place to be, and if God blesses you and prospers you, that's awesome. But I think what you don't want to do is ever be, especially a preacher, that is not generous with financial resources. I mean, you will be shocked. I don't know what it would all translate to today, but there's no doubt he made in the millions and millions of dollars circulating books, and no doubt the most sought after person. And I have heard of high profile pastors today that sell books and stuff, and these guys are millionaires, man. I mean, they just are. And so you can imagine one was like the highest profile pastor in the world, maybe ever, was Spurgeon. And he invested most of his stuff right back into the orphanage, pastor school, major operations. They called it Spurgeon Enterprises, the vast amount of things that money was being sent to. So, and then number 9, he was sadly grieved over when he was gone. And I referenced this at the beginning. If you only read one part of the book, go read the story of his funeral. I mean, there were I think it was 5 days of viewing, one for church members, one for pastors, it was this big deal, city officials, all kinds of stuff. And then one of my favorite stories, I don't want to break the book on you, but is when, they put him on a horse-drawn carriage, his body, to take him from the tabernacle to his resting place. And they passed the orphanage on the way, and they had set it up where the kids would sing as he passed. They said, but when they passed the funeral, none of the kids were singing because they all just sat down and were just weeping as Spurgeon's body was, passed by. And there's so much more. Again, it was a lengthy chapter. It was a really good read, but he was grieved. And the challenge for me was, I want to be missed when I'm gone, man. I want to live in such a way right here, right now, so that when it's over, I've made some kind of substantial impact on churches, people, kids, whoever. And so that's a challenge to me. And then finally, his church struggled after he died. The church has never been the same, of course. And some people are aware that under Peter Masters, who's the current pastor, the church has come alive again a little bit. Not, of course, to the tune as it was back when Spurgeon was there, but Spurgeon died, I forget what the year was, somewhere in the 1890s, I think. And I mean, it was almost 100 years before there was a significant bounce back. And, I don't know. I guess what I took from that was, this is normally what happens. And it could be good or bad. Like it may be a bad thing on the leader's part. Like he didn't prepare well. I'm not saying Spurgeon did. It could just be that God uses people in seasons and times. It's like your direct legacy as far as your church may not go on past you. I mean, and I want to try to do my best to see that the legacy of the church goes on. But what's far more important is what I'm doing right now. Just making the difference right now where I am. And anyways, there's your little thing. There's a few. There's a lot more, but man, I just kind of sketched those down. They were powerful. So the link to the book is in the chat if you guys want to pick that up. Highly recommend it. It's a good vacation read. I don't know if it's on audiobook. I didn't even check if it's on Scribd. It might be on Scribd in audio form. I'm not sure, but I saw Keith linked up to Scribd there. That's a great tool as well if you do not use that. So, all right, guys. Well, I'm going to stop there on that part. And usually what I do now is just we bounce to any maybe questions or just maybe some feedback on that for just a few minutes, and then we'll have a word of prayer together. But we can spread out. It can be it doesn't have to be about the book or about Spurgeon, but any ministry related topic, family related, whatever. I just want to take a few minutes and see if anybody has anything you want to talk about or bring up. Yeah, David.
I'll mention stuff. It's interesting when you were talking about his enormous ministry critics, and of course we all face those, and it's just been interesting. I guess just kind of fresh on my mind because this past Sunday was our first service. We've been out of our auditorium for about 9-10 weeks. We just went through a massive remodel, and so as you can imagine, we did the ultimate sin and went from pews to chairs. And so, had a couple critics, but overwhelming majority was for it. And the whole project, it's been wonderful, wonderful spirit. Baptized 7 Sunday morning, first service back in there, and all men, young men and older men. So that was a blessing. And so really cool. But kind of just what was on my mind is just as you face some critics, whether it's about something as what should be as small as a remodel, as far as why there should be so much criticism about that or whatever it may be. I guess what comes to my mind is just knowing having the wisdom to as Proverbs 26 says, whether you answer a fool according to his folly, or whether you answer not a fool according to his folly. Both verses 5 and 6, I think it is, or 4 and 5, say the same. Verse 4 says answer a fool, verse 5 says answer not a fool. And so I guess just, for all of us, right, knowing that wisdom, when to and when not to, I guess.
Yeah.
Something we battle.
Yeah. No, man, that's good. And it frustrates you sometimes when you're something so trivial. You think that you missed it. Okay, 7 people just got baptized. We've just did a major upgrade. And the only thing you can think of to say right now is, you don't like
where your rear end sits, right?
Yeah, right. That's a great point. And I found very rarely do I feel compelled to answer a fool.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I think the safest place to be is just smile, go on. I've got an old curmudgeon in my church. I mean, I'm just telling you, man, he's upset about everything I do. Hey, we had Saturday morning men's prayer and we moved it to Sunday morning. It's just better for everybody. I mean, who wants to come out on Saturday morning? I mean, not in the city like this, man. It's just not realistic. And he wrote me this email. He just felt compelled to write me an email. Pastor, I just want you to know, you're moving that prayer meeting. I'm against it, and I just can't support it. And I just said, what? So I wrote him back and I said, hey, man, you'll be missed. That's all I said. You'll be missed. Didn't say a word. As childish as I think it is, as much as I want to just say, come on, man, grow up, dude. Really? The best thing to do is just say you'll be missed. In fact, the same guy last week wrote a big email mad because we won't give him a building key. And if I'm in here fixing stuff, I need a building key. I just don't feel right about that. And I don't think I can do this anymore. And so what do we say? Sorry to hear that you can't do this anymore. You've been greatly helpful. Move on. I don't have to address it. I don't have to say you're being a baby. You're being a child. I don't even have to say, oh, please, please come, please do this. Because if it's not one thing, it's another. And if you give in, if you entertain, I've heard guys that won't even call their sanctuary worship center because one person spoke up and got mad about it. I'm like, good night, man. And the problem is you don't have to answer, but you also don't have to capitulate to it. And you have to steady your course. And will people like that sometimes leave? Yes. And if they do, it's probably just the best thing for everybody. And you're just like, absolutely. You know what? Praise the Lord, man. And I've told people this probably more than a dozen times last couple of years. Look, I want you to happily serve the Lord. If you cannot happily serve the Lord here, please do it somewhere else for your sake. Because you need to happily serve the Lord with joy. So, man, there's a way, guys, we can sometimes let this stuff really take it personal. We can really, just overindulge ourselves with the feeling that, all the feelings that come with these kinds of things. Or we can have simple strategic answers without budging and not entertain it. And I think that's the way to go. I found when I had my worst problem in 2019, I didn't say a word to anybody. I was getting hammered, man. I was getting hammered online. People were going crazy on Facebook. Former church members I'm talking somebody called me Hitler on Google reviews. That true story had happened. He said he's a good speaker, but so was Hitler. That was a true story. Now I was able to get that one taken down on hate speech. But and you're like, oh, whatever. But I didn't answer.
No, that's good. That's good.
I didn't answer. I just said, and 1 Peter 2 says, when he was reviled, he reviled not again. And I just kind of settle myself in there. I just kind of rest in the silence and knowing I'm just going to keep moving, man. I'm just going to keep going. Trusting God, trusting God for results. That's good. Good comment, man. Anybody else got a question or a word? Keith.
Hey, man. So we've had some blessings as we've been down here. For you guys who don't know, I've been down here for 7 months in Texas, and it's hot. It's just hot. But So the churches, they're getting really excited, and one thing I'm seeing, a lot of people are just like jumping in on, like, they're serving, like volunteer stuff. Like, I got guys doing landscape and stuff. Like, I didn't ask them to do it; they're just doing it. And so on Sunday, I walk into the church, and there are American flags everywhere. Like, they're everywhere. There were these two like 6x4 like flags hanging behind my pulpit, like massive, bigger than my bed, and I'm like, nobody asked me, nobody told me. It was just like, hey, I guess it's American Flag Day at church, but I found out later, nobody, like, they were just like, we wanted to surprise you, we thought you'd love it. Like, there's no bad attitude here.
Right.
But kind of a leadership thing, like, I don't want that to happen again. Those things turn sour quick. So I want to get ahead of it. So I figured I'd ask, your advice on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell you the way I can curb it, a direct curb here on a facility related thing. I just create a policy, and it may not have to be written, because you may not be in a formal place where written policies like really happen, but have somebody that does decorations, whoever it is. For me, it's my secretary and my wife. They're all involved in that. They're the ones who, and we don't do a lot of chain stuff. We don't do anything like that. But you could say, hey, and maybe try to find another on ramp for this. I wouldn't directly go at this one. What I'd do is I'd say to Sonia or whoever else might be involved in some of the stuff, say, hey, look, coming up in a few weeks, we're gonna change up some plants or something on the platform, and then it's gonna give me an opportunity to send maybe a church-wide email out and just say, hey, hope you guys noticed the new whatever. We appreciate everybody serving, in order just to all be on the same page. When there's any kind of decoration, any kind of change or update, here's these two ladies that we work through, and just see what, try something like that. Like, see if by fishing something like that. And then if people ignore that kind of admonition, that's when you have to go at it directly. I'm kind of dealing with that right now, a little bit different on the keys to the building. How many of y'all understand there can be problems with keys to the building? Keys to the building. Everybody wants keys to the building. So I just invested $50,000 to do access control on my campus. So, like, it's all electronic, it's all cloud-based. You have to have a fob. Everything unlocks at 8:00 Sunday morning, automatically locks at 1:00, all that kind of stuff. I mean, so it was a big spend for our campus. It was necessary for most of you. I'm sure it would not be necessary, but we have multiple use of this facility and so on and so forth. Anyways, I'm going through a little bit of this right now with keys. Everybody thinks they have to have a key. Now I'm going to get to come out with a fresh policy. So I'm looking for that on-ramp of a fresh policy. I can just tell everybody, you don't need a key. Every person that comes to this campus during the week must check in at the office. Everybody. I don't care if you're coming to clean the auditorium. I don't care if you are unclogging a toilet. I don't care if you are a deacon. Every visitor on this property now must come through the office. And that's a big deal. Now, there's a lot of people that aren't going to like that. But you know what? Hey, listen, man, what are you gonna do? I got 2 Christian schools, at least my building. Actually 3. I've got a 3rd Christian school that does their basketball. They use our gym for their basketball season. I have children and teenagers and residents all over this property 24/7. And man, just think of the danger of just a door getting left open, or just anybody at any time walking through where there's children and teenagers and all this kind of stuff going on. I just got to a conviction it wasn't right, and I don't care who gets mad. We needed something new, and so that's going to be the same kind of thing. You establish a policy, then you watch for who might resist it or try to go around it. Then you address it individually. Hey, man, look, I know this is tough, but it's not that hard, man. Go to the office. We can clear the rooms for you that you need to get into. It's just safety for everybody. And most people, the word safety is a big word. So like in this day and age, when I tell our church that we went to access control, there might be a few people frustrated, but majority of them are going to be glad that there's not going to be an active shooter that's going to be able to run in. I mean, those doors are going to lock right after the service starts. So if you're going to get in our church, you're going to have to bust your way through doors. Then you're going to have to get through all of our security team that has concealed carry. By the time you get to the auditorium, if you get to the auditorium, we have 5 or 6 more people ready to gun you down before you ever get there, after we've evacuated the auditorium. So you see what I'm saying? It's just, I know that's a more complicated answer, but I think the principles, Keith, are the same. If there's a change and you want to implement something, roll it out as a policy and then watch for people that are really having a hard time with it, then deal with them individually and highlight the reasons why. The American flag one's tough, buddy. I'm going to tell you about that one. That's tough. I'm American. Look, yesterday was awesome. I had a 2-hour and 37-minute playlist cranking at my pool all day. Look, I'm for it. I'm USA all the way. I'm Bruce Springsteen, all of it. Okay. I'm all in. But there's this thing with people thinking that American and Christian are the same thing, kind of. I've got a deacon that doesn't like that we don't have flag. We don't have any flag. We don't have a Christian flag. We don't have American flag. We don't have any flags on our property. Like in worship space. I'm not saying a cool flag out in the yard or something's not a great idea. But for us, it's just not centered. Like, I didn't say one thing about 4th of July on Sunday. I preached on Haggai. I mean, look, if there's a place, might be a place for a video. If you feel compelled to do it, that's totally fine. But man, this is where, guys, you can get tripped up on this kind of stuff. You can Mother's Day, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Father's Day. By the time you do all the secular holidays, there ain't no room for Jesus left, because every Sunday is already given out. And then, so we're like completely different, man. Well, I tell you what I do on certain days, like Mother's Day. I think Father's Day is coming up. Or did we miss? No, we missed Father's Day. I missed Father's Day. I was in another church. That's what happened. I was in a different church. But instead of doing some big like hoopla thing, we do a quick video, like a 1 minute, 30-second video, and do some kind of quick giveaway or something. And then, we just move on. We don't decorate and all this. I think the same thing's true. I see guys all the time, like my sermons on America. Well, man, like, wow, I don't even know how you go. I mean, I can't go there just because it's not in the Bible. So it's just gonna be hard for me to come there. You know what I mean? So, but here's the thing. You want to be very careful to hit that one square on, because you're going to sound like a communist. Okay. You're going to have some dude with a Trump hat that is not going to be happy with you. So that's why I'm trying to tell you to take another angle on it. The American flag one's tough. And again, I'm not against if you have American flag in your auditorium, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't have one. I'm just telling you what we do.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode, and please don't hesitate to leave us a 5-star review and share this podcast with other church leaders like yourself. Of course, make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel and that you're following us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you may listen to podcasts. If you'd like to connect with Bryan and learn more about Church Advance, simply head over to bryansams.com. This podcast is hosted by Bryan Sams. It's co-hosted and produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and my team at mustincrease.com. Thanks again for joining us for this episode, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one as we continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here on Church Advance with Bryan Sams.